Welcome everybody to today's User Dev meeting. We had a different topic scheduled for today by Christian Toyna, but that will be rescheduled to a later day when he can make it. So if you were looking forward to that topic, don't be uh, discouraged. That will come up later. But instead, I'd like to welcome today Zach Dover, our upstream Ceph documentation lead, and he will be presenting um, uh, all about the Ceph Beginner's Guide and all of his work that he's been doing there. So take it away, Zach.
Okay. Can you hear me, Laura? I'll ask you.
Yes.
Okay, cool. My name is Zach Dover. I am the head of upstream docs for the Ceph Foundation. And Sage hired me at the end of 2019 to clean up the Ceph docs. And what I'm going to talk about is the proposed beginner's guide, which I hope to have done. Well, some version of the beginner's guide is going to be finished by the time we have the next Cephalicon, so April or May of 2024. And I've linked to the text that I have for the prospective beginner's guide that has been compiled now. And I have, it's on an Etherpad. Everybody here is welcome to make comments on it. It's, shall I put the link in oh, Laura's got it. I have 2 copies on that Etherpad, which is how we do a lot of documentation editing. There is a copy at the top, and then at line 100, there's a second copy that you're invited to make comments on. So the goal of this talk, there's a lot of people here now. The goal of this talk is to find shared goals. Like, what are things that people want in the beginner's guide? And the beginner's guide is kind of half cooked right now. And if you want to get something into it, now's the time. So the goal of the beginner's guide, I'd already had the idea by the time of Cephalicon of last year. But I went to Jonas Ster's talk, which is, I think it was called How to Make Beginners Love Ceph. And he gave a talk that was like, well, what does the manager do? Shouldn't the manager be called the balancer? Because that's more like what it does. It's confusing to call it the manager. Maybe we could have a document that would explain that the manager mostly balances, and like the monitor is actually a mapper maintainer, and that these terms don't necessarily lead a beginner to a very good understanding of what a Ceph cluster is. And so I'd already been thinking about this, and so now we're going to write a Ceph beginner's guide. The idea behind it is that I do not want it to take more than 5 minutes to read. And I want it to be able to be read by an absolute mind of the beginner, greenfield noob who knows nothing about Ceph, but maybe they've been told you need to give me a presentation on Ceph by 11 a.m. so we can decide on purchasing or something like that. And somebody can read this and at the very least, say sentences to another person that are not false about Ceph. So one thing I'm going to do in this is I'm going to talk about what I didn't know when I began. I want to talk about my deficiencies and my misconceptions about Ceph, because what I need in order to write this thing properly is an understanding of the mind of a person who is ignorant of Ceph. And then I'm going to open up the conversation. I hope that this talk is only about 15 minutes long, Laura. I'm going to open up the conversation for other people to talk about what they did not understand initially when they started learning about Ceph. And I hope that I've established a sufficiently candid tone that people will actually talk about what they didn't know. When I was first hired by Sage, I only had a vague understanding. I mean, I knew what data redundancy was, but I had no sense at all of the scale of the Ceph cluster. I had this idea of Ceph that it was maybe more like a utility like Volker Tyler's Open Media Vault, which, and by that, I'm not trying to cast any aspersions on Open Media Vault. I use it myself and I think it's great, but I didn't understand the massive scale that Ceph is pitched at. I didn't really know anything about erasure coding, except that you could store the same amount of data with it in less space than you could if you used replication, but only if you had fancier, more expensive processing power. I didn't know who Richard Hamming was. I didn't know what Hamming 7.4 code was. I didn't know any of this stuff initially. I knew what file systems were because, like pretty much everyone, I've been using file systems my entire life that I've used computers. And I had a decent sense of maybe the deficiencies of file systems because I don't know if anybody here knows Ted Nelson, who is he wrote a computer lib in the early 70s. He's highly critical of file systems for what he add your names under the attendees section. He's highly critical of the file system. He sees it as inherently hierarchical and elitist. So I was more aware of what file systems were, but I really didn't know the difference between block storage and object storage. And so I don't know if in the beginner's guide there's scope for such distinctions, but I want to get ideas from the community. I want to ask everybody here, do we describe the differences between block storage and object storage, and like when one is appropriate and when the other isn't, and how, correct me if I'm wrong here, Laura, but even though we may have like a metadata server and a file system on top, underneath it's really object storage with Ceph. Like everything is like ontologically object storage, just masquerading as other forms, right? Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, that's all right. I mean, yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay, that's good. So I wanted to write a beginner's guide because the only document that was remotely close to any sort of tour of the Ceph cluster when I started was the architecture document, which is on docs.ceph.com, and look for architecture on the left pane, on the tree pane on the left. And even with the architecture document, though, getting an understanding of Ceph is difficult the same way that it's difficult to get an understanding of the career of Napoleon or the Concert of Vienna or Watergate or the game of Go. But in all those cases, stick with me here, this is going to be an extended analogy that will eventually come back home. In all these cases, though, we can at the very least give short sentences that provide beginners with a basic understanding of these things, like Napoleon, born in Corsica, fights in the French Revolution against the monarchy, fights against Austria and Italy, fights against the Ottomans in Africa, comes back to France to fight pretty much all of Europe, establishes a continental system which blocks all British trade, pushes things too far by going into Russia, and then gets defeated and deposed, and then goes into exile. And the Concert of Vienna, which is the second thing I mentioned, is this agreement in 1815 by the nations of Europe to try to make sure that no more Napoleons happen. And arguably sets up the political situation that leads to World War I. The third thing that I mentioned was Watergate. And so you have a paranoid alcoholic president of the United States in the early 70s, overseeing a wiretapping and blackmail operation, which is meant to get intelligence that he can use to remain in power, consolidate his power. But then during one of the burglaries, the burglars get caught, and over the next 2 years, the United States Congress discovers the president directed this burglary and wiretapping project, and that he wiretapped himself, thereby creating an audio record of his responsibility. So stay with me. We've got one more. Go is a 4,500-year-old Chinese board game played in a 19 by 19 grid by two players who alternatingly place stones, black and white, on the intersections of the grid, following just two basic rules, and the object is to capture territory on the board. So those are my four capsule explanations. None of them are complete. I didn't mention Arthur Wellesley, who's the Duke of Wellington, or any of the names the seven coalitions formed against Napoleon, or the name of Clemens von Metternich, or George Gordon Liddy or Mark Felt, who were important to Watergate, or the co-rule in Go, without which like Go games can go on forever and ever and ever. But these capsule explanations are nonetheless useful to people who know nothing more than they want to know more about these things. So the goal of this beginner's guide document is similar to that. Like, I am not looking for exhaustive explanations of every aspect of a Ceph cluster. What I want are small encapsulated sections that can be repeated by people who are otherwise ignorant of Ceph, and they won't be false. And they can also be used to acquire greater understanding of what Ceph does. Now, I want to distinguish this from another document that I hope to write probably sometime next year, given the amount of writing backlog that we've got. I also want to write something called a test drive document, which is not the beginner's guide. And what I mean by test drive document is, once you have a cluster up and running, great. So Patrick, can you not hear me?
I can hear you.
You can hear me, Laura. So
It might just be on your end, Patrick.
I can count to 10 or something, Patrick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If
I'll
that's
send a message. Oh,
okay. All right.
yeah.
Everybody else seems to. So it's on you, Patrick. Good luck. So anyway, back to this test drive document. That is not what I want to do here. I do want to do a test drive document eventually. Like, now you have a Ceph cluster, so what can you do with it? And this is a discussion for another time. I'm thinking that I'll do it with VStart cluster. Laura, you were absolutely right. In Amsterdam, VStart was the way to go, because that way you don't have to get into the like snowflake niceties of everybody's hardware, exactly how it works. You were absolutely right about VStart. When we had lunch in Amsterdam, or yeah. So anyway, let me see if I've got. There are a few things that we don't quite have in the documentation yet that I want to bring up to the community. And when I've done this, then I'm going to turn this over for general discussion. It's getting on to 20 minutes now. So first of all, we don't have a great definition of OSD. When I had thought about this beginner's guide, I thought, I'll say that the OSD is the fundamental part of the Ceph cluster. But that's just not true. It's like I don't know, it's like a Jenga structure at the end of a Jenga game, and every single part of it is essential. Like, to say that the OSD is more fundamental than the monitor is just wrong, because the OSD won't work at all unless it has monitors to know where the data in the OSDs resides. So I had thought, at first, well, I'll describe things in terms of the OSD. And then just a couple of weeks ago, Josh and I had this discussion about what does OSD even stand for. And I wrote to Sam Just, who wrote with the definition that Sage had come up with in 2000, I think it was 2006, when he wrote his Crush paper about the Crush algorithm. In that paper, OSD is referred to as object storage device. Subsequently, it is the object storage daemon. And okay, can you hear me now, Patrick? All right, okay. Anyway, Sam had written back to me saying that in Sage's paper, it must have been just a different time, and the paper served a different purpose, a different audience, because the definition of OSD conflated the daemon itself with the hardware on which it ran. And now it's daemon. We still have 4 places in the documentation where device occurs, because we have a tremendous amount of documentation, and some of it's legacy documentation. But anyway, one of the things to do with the beginner's guide is to come up to reduce these ambiguities, to make it so that these things that are ambiguous for legacy reasons are no longer there. We still don't really have in the documentation a very clear explanation of pools, of storage pools. Like, we do refer to them, as though everybody just knows what they are. And we refer to them frequently with reference to placement groups and pools working together. But there's not really any, there's nowhere that you can look right now that says explicitly and definitely this is what a pool is, this is what a placement group is. Until earlier this week, we did not have an explicit definition anywhere in the documentation of quorum. And last time I met with Josh for one of our fortnightly meetings, I asked Josh, what's a quorum? I think it's this. And he said, no, it's not even that. Your notion of quorum is not quite right. Quorum just means that more than 50% of the monitors in the cluster are in an up state. So 2 days ago, I added that to the glossary. This is the sort of thing that I want to put in the beginner's, well, maybe not in the beginner's guide. I don't know. That's what we're going to discuss, the proper scope of the beginner's guide. So the document is available to everybody. It's only about 75 lines of 80 columns. I don't want it to be long. It would be very easy to make it really long, but I want it to be the sort of thing that can be read and then directs people to more in-depth documentation if they're interested in it. So this is a hunt for the basics, like the really, really, really basics. Like, for example, and I open this up for discussion. I'll open it up for discussion with this. When I started working with Ceph, it took me maybe a month or two to even understand that the whole big Ceph thing is the cluster. And that, like, if you get nothing else out of the beginner's guide, maybe you get out of it that if you don't know anything about Ceph, you at least know that the whole thing installed is called a cluster. So it is, I've spoken for 17 minutes at this point, and now I'm going to, with your permission, Laura, open it up for discussion. I feel like in a topic that people didn't know that they were going to get, probably 15 to 17 minutes is about as long as the human patience can last.
Yeah, go for it.
So,
I
okay.
actually was going to say, I think you had brought this up earlier, but that we're lacking. I have seen a lack of this in the documentation, like for object, block, and file storage, listing a general way, generalizing the use case for each, because I think those three use cases are generally talked about in very, you know, terms that are closer to the actual function of each application, but not talking about them in real world use cases
Yeah,
that you would, so
it's
um,
abstract and not concrete, not like
right.
yeah. I
That's
actually
definitely
have
something.
in over. I should have brought it with me into this room, but on my dining room table, I have 4 handwritten pages about defining the different storage interfaces by use case. Like, and I don't know if this is exactly the same thing. You said object, block, and file, right? Yeah. Or I'm
Right.
sorry, object, block, and file. I'm sorry, I misheard you.
Oh, yeah, object.
Yeah. So maybe then I could add a section to the beginner's guide, and I want to solicit. Like, this is the time. I mean, this isn't a speak now or forever hold your peace thing. Like, I'm always available. You can always request an alteration. Anybody who can hear my voice right now is welcome to request an alteration to any of our upstream documentation. But maybe there should be a section in the beginner's guide that says, I don't know, like the main use case of block storage is providing storage to virtual machines or something like that. I think that's still true. Josh maybe will correct me if I'm not, if he's listening.
Yeah, definitely something like that, or you can even list several use cases. Um, we can even go back to, I had done a blog post a while ago where I asked people to provide their use cases for their cluster and what application they use. So of course it's difficult to just write one sentence to encapsulate everything, but I think that's kind of um, what we're looking for. You can even list several use cases to encapsulate that. I think.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to having a short 3 to 5 item list saying this is some of the stuff you can use, I don't know, block storage for or object storage for, and then having a longer document that, oh, Brian Stillwell has said, one thing I've noticed people new to Ceph don't understand is how the different, come on, Jitsi, don't do that. One thing I've noticed people new to Ceph don't understand is how the different storage types are all built on Rados but don't interact with each other. Like you can't treat your S3 bucket like a CephFS directory. That's, all right, that is getting copied and put in this document. Thank you, Brian. This is exactly the sort of thing that I would like out of this interaction. There we go. Good. Go for it, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks. I wondered if it was worth mentioning some more of the optional things. Like you discussed the metadata server, which is useful for CephFS, but you don't say anything about the Rados gateway or the dashboard, which I think anyone starting a Ceph cluster will need to interact with at least the dashboard. Likewise, I don't know if you want to say something about Ceph ADM, what it is, what you might want it, why it might not be available.
I'm sorry that I had my my mic on while I was typing your. Okay, so RGW, dashboard, and what was the third thing?
Ceph ADM, what it might be and why you might or might not have it in your cluster.
That's good. Yeah, Ceph ADM. Is the typing extremely loud? Let's see. Okay, there's more coming in. Make sure you know the difference between a Rados object and a Ceph S3 object. Yeah, that's good too. Thank you, Stefan. And then Olga Sean says another common use case is to have Rados GWS providing RESTful object store S3 compatible. Okay.
I think to look at the previous comment, basically.
Yeah.
I didn't see that in.
This is exactly the sort of stuff that I want from the community. But if this is somehow like, I have in my mind a goal for a document like this. Basically, I'm writing it for myself at the end of 2019. If I could have a time machine a year from now and go back to 2019 and hand myself this document, then that's the Worms on Mars science fiction goal that this serves. But there might be some sort of like actual in the field pre-sales or something like that goal that this serves. I suggest creating a high-level architecture diagram showing major relationships of key components and functions, perhaps with links to. Yeah, that's. I would like to do a thing like this, but I'm gonna have to. I think I'm gonna have to be in person at Cephalicon with people in order to draw it out.
Or maybe a better question to ask is, we have we have an existing architecture photo, but what could be improved about that?
Yeah, or what's obsolete, because that thing is 6 years old at least, like at a minimum. Yeah. Is this
one question
I
have? I'm just curious. Like I remember, Zach, one of the first things that you actually did was you wrote up a Ceph ADM crisp getting started guide.
Yes.
And I'm curious how have the community seen it? How useful was it, and if there is any kind of feedback to that kind of stuff? Because the whole aim was to, at that point, Ceph ADM was pretty new, and the aim behind Zach's documentation was to lower the bar to it and like help people understand basic things that we can do with Ceph ADM.
I will gently correct you, Neha. Actually, when I was hired, it was the last 4 months of Ceph Deploy, and my crisp getting started guide was written with Ceph Deploy, and then it was rewritten with Ceph ADM 4 months after I started. And
Yep.
and as I mean, this will be meaningful to you and me and Laura and maybe Josh, not very many other people. It took me almost 2 years to understand the get workflow. So what happened there was Sage was still on the project. He had ingested the Ceph ADM version of the CRISP Getting Started guide, which I provided in PDF form, into the Ceph ADM documentation. This is when Sebastian was still with SUSE way back in the day. And I don't know if there's feedback from the community other than like that was the basis of the Ceph ADM documentation in 2020. That's not much of an answer to your question at all. I'm sorry.
I mean, I consider that as good feedback, right? If people aren't complaining about it, that means
Yeah.
that it's somehow serving a purpose. The whole idea was to do that, right? Then I remember this is back. I know it was probably like the first year or something. Then you started with us back in 2020 is where we started this endeavor, and I know it was a continuous effort. And if people have been able to make use of it, then I think it's worth the effort we went through.
Yeah, well, let's since we've got quite a number of people here. Let's see. We could ask everybody here. Do you have any complaints about Ceph ADM? And like, please do speak candidly. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I would, if there's something that's causing horrible carnage, and like that this is the time to. Oh, okay. Let's see here. I think it'd be helpful to briefly outline the different components. Go ahead, Stefan. You can speak.
All right. Well, there would be something I would like to see in Ceph ADM is to have the option to use a spec file for a monitor and be able to provide it a dedicated monitor disk. So we run all our clusters on dedicated hardware and dedicated monitor servers with dedicated monitor hard disks for the monitors, and that would be nice to be able to provision with Ceph ADM.
I'm writing this down in ink right now. That's why I'm quiet for a second. So you want to use a spec file for a monitor and use Ceph ADM to provision it.
Yeah, specifically for hard disks.
Use Ceph ADM provision disks. Let's see. Joshua says, I think it would be helpful to briefly outline the different components for each storage type of cluster, type of cluster requires to operate. I agree, Josh. Like, absolutely. This is one of my longer term goals, is to have exactly these sorts of profiles in the documentation, like reference architectures. I am going to copy this to the Etherpad. Constantine says, if you're writing a kind of document, man, Rados doesn't have a truncate description. Okay, that's good to know. I will add that to the list of unfinished business. Ceph ADM, of course, Matthew says, Ceph ADM, of course, isn't useful and deployed by packages Ceph cluster. Yes, yeah, that's true. Patrick says, I'm new to Ceph, but the first thing I've read was about crush map, and I do not see it in the document. All right, Patrick, if you want to speak or type, please do. What should be in the document about crush map? I guess that would go under monitor, right?
I think. Oh yeah.
That's useful. That's useful feedback. I guess we talk more about OSD maps than crush maps, but a lot of times people have to play with crush maps and offline tools. So I guess that's the general feedback Patrick's trying to give us.
Okay. Well, I have it saved, so it will be. Sorry, I'm French, but understanding your resources will be used in a cluster, maybe. You don't have to apologize for being French. Understanding how resources will be used in a cluster. Okay, cool. Yeah, got it.
We're happy to have French people on the call.
It's a highly international group. Okay. Well, we're half past the hour, Laura. So I say we give it like another 2 minutes and then free everyone. Is that, would it be improper to cut it off at 30 minutes like it's a podcast?
I mean, we have until the hour, but so if people have more questions, we're not totally bound by anything at this point. But let's
And when
give
I,
people a little bit more time
yeah,
for feedback if they have any.
when I used to teach, I would let people out at about 35 past the hour, and I would say that I was there until the top of the hour to field questions. Okay, Josh says keeping the beginner's guide short is a good idea, so it's not overwhelming. Exactly. I totally support that idea. That's him saying this. I think it would be helpful to provide links to other sections of the Ceph documentation that can expand on those topics in order to help keep the beginner on track, but also provide them the next step in that particular topic. This is absolutely the plan, Joshua. Sorry, I don't know if I call you Josh or Joshua. Yes, this is exactly the plan. The goal ultimately.
Josh or Josh, either or Joshua, either is fine. No worries.
Cool. All right. Yeah, that's absolutely the plan. And the plan eventually, and this is the sort of thing it takes multiple years to do properly, is to have any location on docs.ceph.com that you go to lead you to links. It's like water running downhill pulled by gravity toward knowledge. Like I've already started to try to do this with, I rewrote the glossary, and I've tried to put links in the glossary to the sections of the documentation relevant to the particular thing in the glossary. So you can get a capsule definition in the glossary. And then if you need more information about it, I have begun it's not just tried, I have begun the project of linking these things, but this sort of thing will take 18 to 24 months of just keeping at it until it's done. But that is the plan. Like what you wish for is also my plan.
I thought of something that I heard feedback for. I think this might have been feedback from Cephalcon, but people were looking for like a very to know what the minimum amount of hardware you would need to start up a Ceph cluster. And I don't think our documentation is meant to go deep into hardware. We're meant to focus on the software aspects, but I think it would be worth, or even this is something that I'm always trying to nail down for people like Google Summer of Code or the Grace Hopper. But what setup do you need for a VStart cluster? I don't know if that's clear in our documentation at the moment.
Oh, it definitely isn't. Well, I mean, I had to ask you about using the J option in order to constrain the installation of VStart to a sufficient number of cores that it did not just cause my my poor Ubuntu machine with 32 gigs of RAM to crash.
And that is in our README document on the Ceph repository.
It is now.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, you added. So that's
Yeah,
definitely
it is
something that your idea of keeping it very short and then linking to these external things, that definitely is helpful.
Yep.
But yeah, I think we straight up don't have anything like you need this type of operating, or maybe we do have listed like the
We do have
support
operating system
but we don't have
recommendations,
like
but what we don't have are hardware minimums. Like this actually came up at the beginning of 2022. Dan van der Steur sort of asked me firmly, please, let's update the hardware. We do have a hardware recommendations page on the main docs.ceph.com page, but I think since I've been aware of it, there have been maybe 3 attempts to update it, and it always gets bogged down in I don't know, like a feeling of impropriety recommending, like officially, like ex cathedra recommending this hardware over that hardware, because it does. Like, I mean, Ceph is big enough. Maybe it is the sort of thing that would move a market, and that's probably improper. So I thought, and maybe I'm wrong about this, and this is a perfect forum for asking, is this insane? Maybe we have an unofficial, like, I wouldn't maintain it. I wouldn't be doing it in the name of the Ceph Foundation, but maybe we could have a collaborative document that I will, edit and make sure that it's all the commas are in the right place and everything. That says, like, if you want to do this with Ceph, then you can use this particular kind of hardware to do it. Also, and this just goes back to, I can say my own ignorance. I did not understand that this is not really consumer grade hardware that we're looking to run the stuff on. This is like Anthony Diatri has a good command of all these different kinds of new hardware that are available to really squeeze every drop out of the Ceph installation. But yeah, we don't have a resource like this. What do people think about having some sort of unofficial, even not, Matthew says, even not particular type of hardware, but specs, you want this much RAM per terabyte on HDD and so on. Yeah.
Exactly, because I think a lot of different people are going to be using it. There's no right or wrong way that you can go with hardware depending on your use case. But there are certain minimum things that you need to meet, in order. So that's a good comment, Matthew.
I thought stuff could be done all on Raspberry Pis when I started, which it can. Jeff Gerling did one, and I know that Mike has also done one. Let's see, Matthew says, the thing I found hardest with my first Ceph deploy was estimating hardware spec. Okay. All right, well then I think...
And I don't think that our documentation is meant to, like I said, point to specific hardware. And maybe somebody can correct me, a developer, but I think what we can say is, like I said, this is the minimum space that you need. This is the minimum, RAM per terabyte of whatever. I think we can say that kind of thing.
And Josh says, or even what components we recommend can be run virtualized versus what needs to be run on bare metal. And I think we pretty much just say run clocks on bare metal, but yeah, maybe we could go into more detail about that. I mean, when I say maybe we could go into more detail about that, we certainly could.
Definitely. And going again back to your that the document should be short. We can even have just a couple sentences on this, and then about the essentials that you need, and then if there are any unofficial guides that you were talking about, you could just provide a hyperlink there if somebody wants to read more, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we could. I mean, I would do this with an Ether. I would do like a specific hardware recommendation in an Etherpad, then anybody could edit it, and it would. And generally speaking, our upstream Ceph community is extremely respectful, and like Etherpad works. We don't have to have any security. It's like a small town with unlocked doors. See, Brian says, a discussion in the hardware guide would be the difference between consumer grade and enterprise grade hardware. For example, Sebastian used to have a page about SSD performance for the files for journals that was quite helpful. All right.
Has that page been removed? I'm just curious.
I am checking right now.
I just noticed Brian said used to, so I was just curious.
Oh, I don't even know if this is, I'm looking at the hardware recommendations page. All right, so here's the minimum hardware recommendations. And here is the general hardware recommendations page, which needs to be, I could use a lick and a promise. It needs to be rewritten. I mean, the thing is, like, this has to be redone every year. It's like painting a ship. Ah, there it is. Brian has just posted Sebastian's. Oh, it's just a blog.
All good resources.
The question that I have, and I don't know the answer to this, is like, to what degree can the foundation endorse, a blog? I'm not casting aspersions on Sebastian's blog. It's clearly the gold standard against which everything else is to be measured. But, like, do we move the needle on a market that is not appropriate to do?
Yeah, it's kind of. I think that's the thing. Like, anybody can use any kind of blog post they find if it's just available. But yeah, I think if we include it in the documentation, it needs to be reviewed and everything by just like it would be
Well,
anything else.
I wouldn't ingest the material. I would like, maybe I would put this on a page where I'm like, here are some links. Here are some links. I guess it's this is the situation that I see myself in here. We know that these things exist, and we know that this exists because Brian has just mentioned it and then provided it to us. We are the Ceph Foundation. So it seems to me like it would be a weaker foundation if we were oblivious to it. We would be like high school principals pretending that certain activities going on at a high school don't actually happen. Do you understand what I mean? I feel like there should be a place in the documentation to say, like, like, hey, we know that media piracy is happening, and we don't endorse it, but we are aware of it, or whatever. Here are some activities that are not done under the imprimatur of the Ceph Foundation, but nonetheless might be extremely useful. And these are, like, that way we preserve. How do I say this? We preserve the editorial autonomy of the people producing the blogs while recognizing their contribution to the information without having to ingest it directly into the documentation either, because that, like, ingesting this blog is like a 3-day job. That's another thing. Another reason that the beginner's guide needs to be short is that as time goes on, it will have to be rewritten, and I will be the one to rewrite it. And I do not want to reinvent the wheel every 2 years.
Right. So we have thoughts for the beginner's guide. I'm thinking some of this is more in depth and could probably just go into our documentation as a whole. Didn't you have Zach an Etherpad where people could put documentation recommendations on it? Perhaps we can share that here.
Yes, I will. Give me just 1 second. How loud is my keyboard, Laura?
I can hear you typing, but that's all right.
Yeah, this keyboard has a very high action. I hate it. Here we go. Okay, here is a report documentations bug page. And
I'll put this also on our agenda here.
sorry, that somebody has added 2 new things since the last time I looked at this page, and I was just drawn into it, fascinated by it. Paragraph 2 uses the acronym OSD without any explanation. Oh, fair enough. I suppose that itself makes the case for a beginner's guide.
Cool. So I think we've covered a lot. So to sum up what we've covered, I would say, oh, and by the way, this meeting is recorded. So Zach, if you've if you're curious about if you missed anything that somebody said, I'll have the recording for you to look back on. But it looks like we need um, perhaps more focus on distilling what types of
Okay.
what's the bare minimum in every cluster. Like for an RGW cluster, these are the daemons involved, that kind of a
Mm,
thing.
yeah.
And perhaps a sentence or two on hardware. What else was it? Keeping it
Um,
short.
I've got it all recorded in the Etherpad. So I didn't mean to
Perfect.
cut you off, Laura. I'm sorry about that.
Oh no, that's totally fine. I'm just summing everything up.
High level architecture diagram eventually.
Yes, yeah,
Like
that was
it's
another thing.
yeah. I think the suggestion earlier, like the different implementations or deployments, I don't know what you'd call it, the different use cases, the different storage interfaces, like each having a reference architecture that is specific to it would be a big help. However, that is a huge project. It's like a year-long project. It's like 3 months on each different kind of deployment, which is fine. Like, I mean, I'm here to work. I'm not saying we're not going to do it. I'm just saying, like, realistically, to do it properly, it's like building a house. It's a long project.
Definitely. And a couple people noted noting the difference like between a Rados object and a Ceph S3 object. So that goes down to perhaps we just need like you see at the beginning of or at the beginning and end of fantasy books, like a big glossary of words. Perhaps we need something like that of essential Ceph terms.
Sorry,
Oh, did I cut
you
out?
cut out for me there. Yeah.
Oh, I
So
just said
just like,
perhaps we need some like a focus on a glossary of essential Ceph terms, because some people were mentioning like make sure you know the difference between a Rados object and a Ceph S3 object, since a lot of I think a lot of the documentation is spoken about in a very or there are a lot of assumptions made that you know
yeah,
what certain things are, which is
it's written
sometimes
by people who invented the world that they're inhabiting. So they assume
right.
that everybody else must know what they know, and that's just not the case. You need all this articulate, courageous ignorance to bring this stuff out. And what you're describing, I hope this doesn't sound defensive. You're just describing the glossary. That's what the glossary is for. That's exactly what it's
Right.
for. It's like
Oh,
so
do
that
we
you
have a
can go
glossary?
totally. Yeah,
Oh,
I
awesome.
work on it all the
Okay.
time. Here, I'll actually
We
put it
need
in
to
the
make
chat
that more
here.
public.
Yeah, here. This is, there was a major initiative at the end of last year to get the glossary into shape. And I invite everyone to look at the glossary and complain about its deficiencies. I sound sarcastic, but I'm as serious as death. Like, please read through the glossary and tell me what is missing, and I will spend my time adding stuff to it. I just added
You should
quorum.
definitely link to this in your beginner's guide.
Yeah, well, everything in the docs links to this at some. What I mean by this is like when you run into the term OSD, it links to the glossary, and then OSD links to no, that's not right. Oh, it's circular. No, there it is. Okay. No, it's circular. Yeah, that's a shame. We need a better definition of OSD somewhere in the documentation, probably in the architecture document. The idea is that, let's see, let me find a good example here of the kind of thing. Yeah. Okay. So if you go to pool in the documentation, then the head word in the glossary links to the part of Rados operations pools that describes what pools are, although the definition there is pools are logical partitions that are used to store objects, which is, I don't know, I think of in Beetlejuice when Alex Maitland is reading a handbook for the recently deceased, and it says spiritual parameters may vary from manifestation to manifestation. It's like maybe it's true, but it's not particularly, it's just very abstract.
Right.
All right. I feel like at this
Tools.
point, yeah, I feel like at this point, the discussion itself is too abstract and we should release everyone.
Well, thanks everybody for all the wonderful feedback. And Zach, I hope this is helpful.
Yeah, this is
your
great.
development.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks everybody who contributed. And I'm going to stop the recording now so it'll save my file, but enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. And I'll see you next month. And thanks,
All right.
Zach, for your time today.
Of course. Good to see everybody.